Hello and welcome to the Speaker Story Bank 15. This is 15 minutes of a conversation with an incredible thought leader. Yes, I said thought leader because today's guest really is a thought leader. Dr. Rod Berger is going to help us think differently and do differently. He is a renowned journalist. He has traveled the world. He has interviewed tons of celebrities, but also been around the world talking to people every day about the stories that make an impact, about the lives that make an impact. And here's the reality, everyone. Today, as we look at the future of organizations and 2024 and what are leaders looking at, it is going to be about those stories in the room. And that is where I really got excited when I first met Rod and we started talking about, the stories that he's sharing on global stages and how he's changing the dynamic of conversation around what it means to be a better communicator and how the stories in the room, whether the leaders are seeing the stories in their people or how we as individual contributors are seeing our own stories reflected in the work we do, reflected in how we are communicating with one another. These are going to be the things that elevate our organizations in 2024. So please, my guest, Dr. Rod Berger, come join me so we could dive deeper into this. Rod, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Mirjana. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, as I said, this idea, and you said it to me first, you said, what are the stories in the room? And I remember the first time you shared that question with me, and it's really provocative, right? Because we walk into rooms of people every single day, leaders with their teams. How often do we stop to really dig in a little deeper to understand who's on the other side of us? So, can you share a little bit of sort of the inspiration and the inflection point that happened for you around this idea?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes to my work at Vanderbilt University on a yearly basis when I work with these graduate students who are conditioned, like students around the world, to basically build and architect a story that will be marketable to corporations at close to home and like we said, on an international platform. And yet what they're doing is they're bearing the lead if we sort of integrate in a little journalism in this. And you find that actually leaders of all ages and backgrounds are doing the very same thing. And I've sort of quipped that we're sitting on our greatest asset, right? We are sitting and we're not standing up and taking control of the stories that define who we are, who we want to be, and how we are in relation with others to develop and grow fantastic ideas that support a sustainable world, opportunities for those that are on the margins. But I think a lot of it, Mirjana, comes from this denialism that we're sort of living in, which is that we believe that there are elements to our lives that should be there, certainties. And when they're not, because we live in a chaotic world, we don't know how to communicate that. And so we let others tell our stories. Yet we live in a world where Gen Z wants to be they want to be in environments where it's profit or purpose over profits, right? They want to feel connected. And so this is why every business magazine out there, their covers are littered with storytelling is a part of the process. It's the tie that binds culture and strategy for the future. We can't control the environment. We can't control climate change, weather patterns, all remote workplaces. But what we can control is how we communicate that. And I'm incredibly passionate because when I sit down and interview people, whether it's traveling to remote places or over platforms like this, it's always the backstory. It's after we're recording or the microphone is off that you understand that these fantastic leaders, they're struggling as mightily as that young person that's trying to enter the workforce.
Mm. Yeah, do you think that some of our challenge in sharing the deeper nuance to our stories comes from, being raised, let's face it, in ways where people are like, don't be too bold, be a little more humble. You don't have to share everything about yourself. Like there is a piece of that history of ours that we're trying to kind of overcome. But is that something that you've kind of seen play itself out?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is it's a value proposition. How valuable am I within the context of a family, of my community? What are my contributions? And I think that that's super key right now, Marjana. And I know you're seeing this. I would imagine when we're thinking about AI in a world where, if you talk to the experts, and sometimes I'm glad that I get a chance to, and sometimes I'm not, depending upon the day, is that we're walking into a world where a lot of younger people are thinking, and actually those that are running companies around the world saying, well, what do we do if we have the proverbial answer? What skill sets will we be looking for? How do we understand the impact and where we can contribute. I think vitally to the end cause, which is productive roles and responsibilities and jobs that mean something to us, because we want meaning, right? We already have kind of everything at our disposal or the opportunity in many places around the world, especially in a work environment. So, can we now find meaning, purpose, combine those elements where we then feel like we're an active character in that story and not on the sidelines?
Yeah. You bring up AI, so let's dig a little deeper into that. What are you kind of seeing as a storyteller? Being the challenges, but also being some of the opportunity that we could really dig a little deeper into.
Well, yeah, I love that question, Mirjana, because I think we have to. I think there's a reality. I think we have to accurately paint the picture, and we've had a history. So we talk in technology around software adoption curves, but we don't apply that thinking to our talent management and the way in which we might collaborate with a new company that is merged with us or a new initiative. But I think we should, because a successful technology, we want to reduce that software adoption curve so that the end user is utilizing the technology that you've built and invested in. And in the same way, I think we need to understand AI. Like, what are the capabilities? A lot of people on the fringes will say, well, it's not mature enough to be able to understand emotion and or emote through a prompt. But I can promise you, I've seen it firsthand. The developments, even as we're talking now, are continuing to iterate in a way that is incredibly duplicative, if I will use that word, um, in sort of not taking over, but resembling who you and I are. And I think a challenge in the content space, which is why ChatGPT and generative AI is really going after the content space, is because they're making fantastic inroads. And the challenge to that, my contention is that we're in a space where we're allowing algorithms to create our narratives from a corporate and brand perspective. That's dangerous because AI, if it's doing its job well, it's persuading us, Marjana. It's persuading us to buy, to go on vacation, to take a different route to work. Well, if that's the case, then we're losing our connection with whatever that organic nature of being human is. So we have to really think about, how do we want to tell the story without prompts? And the only way you can do that is if you actually allow that to be a part of what you're doing in your leadership on a day to day basis, deconstructing your story to better then allow others within your organization to tell their story. And then you marry that with the brand. Now we have something that is purposeful.
Mm. Well, you know how even as a speaker, as an author, is it sometimes hard for you to tell your story and encapsulate all of who you are? And is there a place for AI to help people do that better? I mean, obviously, you probably do it better than most of us because you are a writer and a storyteller. But if we're asking people to tell the stories in the room and their stories, is there benefit to them just even starting with an AI version of that story and then filling in the nuance of who they are in a deeper way?
I think from an exercise perspective, yeah, I could see, Marcom teams breaking down and sort of seeing maybe what layers of a story might emerge, whether it's for a group or an individual. I think that there's a possibility to be able to do that. I think, look, we have forever, regardless of the language or the culture. I think one sort of bellwether approach to engaging another person and communicating is to be an active listener. And I would contend that in a world that we're talking about, it's about active inquiry. And that is something that is very different. Sadly, there are gender norms or expectations culturally. And when you mix those up, you're not sure if you're supposed to talk or how bold, to your point earlier, right? Or when should I be sort of poised in my listening skills? But what we need to be doing is thinking about active inquiry. Like, I should be interested in understanding your story and not allowing sort of my own biases and or fear that your value is going to be propped up above mine because you share some accomplishment or idea that you have that might be more evolved and mature than mine is at my stage. But that active inquiry allows us to create better prompts. Because if we're going to live in a world of prompts, well, we have to understand how to ask questions, and that comes through inquiries. So to me, there is active listening, but we need to convert that to active inquiry.
Hmm. So, these students that you work with, and when you have them dive deeper to uncover their deeper story, what are their aha moments coming away from an exercise like that?
Great question. Their aha moment, I think, in general, is that those items that are sort of defined by decimal points and LinkedIn profiles, that those are they are necessary, but they are not definitive to who they are. I mean, we are living, breathing human beings. We are iterative in our nature. And so what you find is that you basically a basic skill set or approach is to invert their resume. Right? So they walk in thinking that you want to see top down what they've accomplished, but I talk with them about positional power. If I remove your title, Mirjana, and I remove sort of the sequence of your LinkedIn profile, that can be unsettling to you because you have stacked together wins, for lack of a better word. You've stacked together wins and stories that basically lay out who you are and the level of professional, which will then hopefully yield opportunities and continued and sustainable success for you and your company. Well, if we take that away, now you have to redefine yourself to generate influence and persuasion in relationship and in business.
Mm.
That forces you to then think, now, wait a minute, what's interesting about me? I mean, think about a first date or an interview for a job. You don't walk in talking about the most stale items. No, you share something that's interesting that you think might be a point of connection because that will grease the wheels to connect with that individual, that corporation, that job opportunity. That's why we do that. And so I like to basically tear down the resume and build it from the bottom up. Not from where they're letting me know that they are adept at Microsoft Excel or they're somewhat conversationally proficient in Spanish, but what were those experiences that they had that tell me about who they are? Right? That's the whole component of you say like, well, why would a corporation care about redefining their storytelling? Because your customer wants to know why. In an era where we weren't digital natives, we could get away with, well, you should buy our product because we're the most proficient. We have a legacy of success that is sustained over time. Well, information is everywhere. And now we have to actually judge if it's authentic or synthetic. And
Mm.
so I can go and buy 75 different types of coffee cups, but it's going to be the coffee cup that tells a story. And that's why I'm going to connect with it. It's exactly why we love movies because we connect, or we connect now with podcast hosts and guests and storylines because we feel that there's something in what they're conveying that is innately human that we can then resonate with. That's why we want to
Mhm.
purchase or listen or watch.
Yeah. So when you go into an organization, do you like to work, top down, bottom up? Is there sort of a formula that you share with organization leaders of how to approach this differently? Certainly as we look at 2024 and
Yeah.
how people can do more of this.
So starting with, and let me set this sort of stage here. I think the conditions are ripe for what you and I are talking about for a number of reasons. One, we know that organizations are, and this is regardless of what country or region of the world someone lives in or works in, we have ESG. We have Gen Z's desire and what they're looking for in a work environment. We have executive coaching. What do we think executive coaching is and why has it exploded over the last decade? Because executives are trying to understand how they can recalculate their story to map a new path of achievement or perceived achievement. I'm the
Mm.
chief financial officer. I'm getting pushed into the CEO role. We're making an acquisition. It's all about how to reconfigure the story so that it comes across as authentic. So we have all these markers that say, you know what, story is incredibly important. We know we need to break it down. We just don't know how to do that. And then we look at higher education that is scrambling. If they're honest with consumers, they are scrambling to understand how in the world how do we validate the prices we're charging you as a family, as
Mm.
a student, as an individual, based on what we think is going to be the workplace of the future. And I don't blame them. They don't know. We don't know. But they're scrambling. So we have every indication that says we've got to reformat the stories, right? This is sort of like taking one technology and going, wow, it worked in Microsoft Word, but I'm in Pages and I need to reformat. We've got to reformat. And I think that's a major part of what we're doing. So when we think about working in organizations, you know what? I mean, I love it. And so I'm biased, Marjana. It starts with that initial story. It starts with that initial download with that designated leader and or leadership team. And what I like to, so this is my approach or my framework, but it's a strategically based storytelling based interview framework. Right. So I want to be very strategic in the way in which you and I are going to communicate because I know there's a story in there and I know that it's not going to circumvent your current value proposition that makes you you. That
Mm.
makes people want to follow and learn and be a part of what your idea and inspiration is. And going through that, you find incredible things that people don't know. I'm reminded of an interview that I did with a CEO. This is a couple of years ago. And just during that conversation, walking through my framework of being able to think strategically but story based in our discussion, this individual shared his heritage, his Mexican heritage. And it was just a fantastic story about how that has really built sort of who he is and why he makes the decisions he does with his family, his company.
Mm.
And a couple of days later, after it was published, I had two members individually from the C suite send me a note on LinkedIn. And one was very curious as to how did I get that out of that individual? Right. And really sort of the summation of it was we've been looking for him to share this part of him
Ah,
this entire time because
yeah.
we think that it speaks to the end user and sort of the sensibility of who we are. And that then spawned an entirely different track of marketing around the company, not based on sort of the specifics of him, but of what it means and how they look at their talent, how they look at what they're doing, their mission and vision. I think it's a powerful example.
Oh, so good. I mean, even in the speaking industry, it's something we're talking about in terms of agents and them sharing their stories more on LinkedIn. And there's so many that are like, I don't need to go on. First of all, I don't have time for LinkedIn. It's a vanity play. I don't want to do it. And I'm like, it's your differentiator. Like, if I were a meeting planner and I understood a little more deeply about who you are, what your value sets are, how do you look for fresh new voices, based on those value sets? Well, I'm going to be way more interested. And why do you think it is that such sort of common sense thinking, and we've all failed at common sense thinking at times for sure. Why do we fail so badly and look at it beyond what, recognizing what it really is there for?
The first thing that came to my mind is, and I don't know if we still have it today, but maybe it's just amplified, would be sort of that Facebook phenomena. That when Facebook came out, you had sort of this legion of people that would purposely, it felt like, they would put the most pristine images of themselves and their family, and people immediately thought, "What are we doing wrong?" Because our family picture might not look like that. And I think that some of that is trying, look, I think everybody is looking for meaning. You're looking for a sense of belonging. This is why we are pursuing careers our entire lifetime. And when you talk to someone, even if they've retired, I know that's sort of an antiquated word, but they might say, I don't know if I've found it, but I feel like I found the path. So it's like lifelong learning. And so I think we're on this constant pursuit of establishing value. And so a lot's why these students, these graduate students, think that they've got to bury the lead, like all the interesting stuff is at the bottom, or that executives don't look at their LinkedIn and say, "Gosh, what's the narrative if I start to piece together my bio?" And another example of that is when I'm talking with someone, whether it's an interview or it's a discussion around advice and advising for corporations, when I start to break down their resume on LinkedIn, and they're often surprised that I took notice, yet it's publicly facing. I equate it to when you go to the grocery store. I always like to look at the name tag on the cashier that is, you know, taking my food and sort of bagging that up to say, John, thanks, John, or Susan, I appreciate that. And the look they give you is often, it's like this wonder of, oh my gosh, you noticed me, right? We want to be noticed. I go back to my clinical days in mental health. I mean, that was, you break it all down. I'm not sort of, not to use a broad stroke, but in general, people that you work with, when you share with them that you thought of them when they weren't sitting in front of you in a therapy room, that means
Mm,
everything. It's
yeah.
such a simple thing. That's how relationships go from a coffee date or a date over wine to a marriage proposal.
Mm,
Because you
yeah.
share with them, you communicate something that says, "I thought about you when you weren't around. I made
Mm.
the effort."
Yeah, I love that. Well, I need to thank you because I actually brushed off my own resume recently just to say, are there things that I'm missing? And do you know what I discovered? And it's helping me do things like this. This is like, let's just try this new thing. Let's put it out there. It's the fact that in, my background, I have acting and I did some, theater in New York and some just indie films and things like that. But what did I love? I loved improv. And so I'm like, take more risks. You liked improv, like get out there and do more. And that piece of it is helping me even apply more of that in business and just try things and take the risk and be okay with it. And I don't know that I would have started looking at that if I didn't look more deeply at all this nuance to my background.
That's the beauty, right? That's where it lies. I mean, that's why when you even think about a vacation or something, and someone talks about like what were the big, what are the takeaways? What did you really enjoy? You're going to fill in that picture with all those subtleties of a cafe you found that you just never
Mm,
expected, and the conversation that you had on a train or a plane. Those are the things that you're going to share, not the pictures that everybody can get in front of the monument, right? You might
yeah, that's
have the
it.
picture, but you're going to talk about the experience.
Mm, I love it. Well, this is the Story Bank 15, so we have to keep it short, my
Have
friend.
we pushed the
You'll be back.
walls of the 15 minutes? I'm shocked, Mirjana.
We did. But in closing, 2024, again, we keep talking personal leadership. This piece of storytelling is going to be so important to the individual, to the organization level. What do you kind of want to leave people with to think about as they move into the new year, thinking about their stories?
Yeah, story is our currency. I mean, I go back to that all the time. There's no exchange rate, right? You have that in the palm of your hand. It's an active choice that you make, just like an active inquiry. And I heard this a while ago, and it really rings true for me, is to implore people to be more of a novelist than a witness. I think
Mm,
we talk about bearing witness, but it's really don't sit on your greatest asset to my earlier quip, but to think about the role that you play because it's valuable, right? A play, a musical, a movie takes all parts.
mm,
In today's day and age, being a parent takes the community to make sure that everybody can get to where they need to go, and or we can support local needs and efforts. And so, be a novelist, right? Think
I
in
love
that
that.
fashion.
Yeah, that's so great. And as fast the rate of change as things are moving so fast, it's going to take all of us to come together and know our narratives and know how we all kind of are a part of that bigger tapestry
And
together,
I'll
right?
close with this. The irony on change, when we think about it, because we are all going through perpetual change, is that we say we don't want change. Yet we never want to have the same experience twice. We judge that against itself, right? So we actually embrace it. It's exciting. It's adventurous. The same can be said for who we are, our backgrounds, and the way in which we communicate and build our companies.
Mm, such a high note to leave us on. Thank you so much, Rod.
Thank you, my friend.
And people can find you at drrodberger.com, right? And other places. Thank you so much. And we will be back with more next week.
Thank you.